I didn't think that we could have a mass genocide on this scale being live streamed on your goddamn laptops every day of the week for a year and not have the international community, including the U.S., somehow, and I'm, maybe not the government, but people fighting back against it. Now, many people in America are fighting back, and I obviously highlight those videos all the time, so I don't want to say that people aren't, but this is truly unbelievable carnage Israel's been able to perpetrate. Mint Press did a deep dive, Robert Inlakesh, on what we now know. And, obviously for the stuff you already know about this, I apologize for reiterating it, but I felt like it's been a year of genocide. It's time to actually decide what we know about October 7th. On October 7th at 6:30 a.m., the Qassam Brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, launched a military assault targeting Israeli military positions, kibbutzim, which most of you maybe know by now are, small groups of people that live together. They used to be communists. I've been to a kibbutz years and years ago for like a few hours, not like living there. They used to be communist back when Israel was kind of in their earlier founding days. And now, yes, there are groups of people living together. They still kind of claim to have some communist ideas, but they're really not anymore. Anyway, so they targeted those, and they're targeting Israeli military posts for obvious reasons. They're also targeting these kibbutzim and these settlements because these are the settlements that are closest to Gaza, meaning stolen most recently, I guess. The land was stolen. According to a 16-page report issued by the group titled Our Narrative, their stated mission was to attack Israeli military positions and seize captives to exchange for thousands of Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. The report also acknowledged certain faults in their actions. On October 7th, it was quickly reported that at least 413 Palestinians were killed in Israeli airstrikes across the Gaza Strip. However, the Israeli death toll underwent several revisions before an accurate figure emerged. So basically, number of Palestinians killed, we know immediately. Number of Israelis killed, top secret. Initially, the Israeli government stated that 1,400 Israelis had been killed. By November 10th, that number was revised down to around 1,200. And now the number stands at 1,139 killed. That included 815 civilians and 324 soldiers, police or security officers. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind. So that would be 815 civilians. A couple of things to keep in mind about the civilian number. One is many of those, 815, were killed by IDF. We will never know how many. Israel has done a good job of covering up all the evidence for us to prove who was killed by IDF and who wasn't. Israel, they announced that they were shredding and burying all of the cars that were shot up by IDF helicopters, like something like hundreds of cars, just as one example. Also, and I did research this because I had not known this until a few days ago. Well, we'll get to this more in a second, but I'll just throw it out there because I started down this path. The Nova Music Festival, where the highest number of innocent people were killed, which was heavily shot up by IDF helicopters, was moved to that location on the Gaza border 2 days before October 7th. From what I read, there's not a great reason as to why. Now, that could be a crazy coincidence, and as this article will mention in a minute, Hamas did not know the Nova Music Festival was going to be there because it was moved there 2 days before. So if it's 815 civilians and 324 soldiers, this would suggest a civilian to combatant ratio of roughly 3.5 to 1. Civilians versus combatants killed. But that's assuming that all those civilians were not killed by the IDF and were not armed. Everybody in Israel is in the military at some point. Most of these people are armed. Most of these civilians that were in these kibbutzim, they know that they're near Gaza. They're all armed and ready for something to happen. So civilians is a weird line to draw here. If these Hamas militants are coming in to take hostages and someone runs at them with a gun, that's no longer a civilian. That's by the laws of conflict, that's actually a combatant. None of that is considered in these numbers. But even if it were not, even if none of that mattered, it's still a ratio of 3.5 to 1. An article that's quoted by Netanyahu and others by John Spencer, it was in Newsweek. Spencer references the 2016-2017 Battle of Mosul in Iraq to justify, basically he's justifying Israel's genocide, to justify what he deems an acceptable civilian to combatant ratio in U.S. wars. wars. And he highlights that in the Battle of Mosul in Iraq, the ratio was 4-1. 10,000 civilians were killed and only 2,000 ISIS fighters. Now, here's the thing. First of all, you have to think that's fine. I don't think that's fine. I think that's horrific, not to mention the fact that the U.S. helped create ISIS. So you'd have to start with the premise that killing 10,000 civilians to kill 2,000 ISIS fighters is just awesome. And I don't agree with that premise. So he points to the 4-1 ratio and says, this is just normal warfare, right? 4-1, kill 4 civilians, get 1 bad guy. Using this military logic and assuming Hamas was responsible for every Israeli death on October 7th, which is not true, they achieved a more favorable civilian to combatant kill ratio than the U.S. did in Mosul. But this is Israel trying to claim these ratios are acceptable. Therefore, if they've killed 10,000 Hamas fighters in Gaza, as Israel claims, which is, again, not true, they claim they've killed 10,000. Well, what do you know? It's 4-1. Or actually, I guess it's 3-1, right? 40,000, 10,000 are combatants, according to Israel. 3-1. Hey, we're doing great. It's fine. All of this to me is repulsive. All of this, 4-1 civilian to combatant ratio is absolutely war crimes. It's disgusting. So they're trying to justify their genocide, and I don't think it justifies it at all. Who killed who? The October 7th assault began with a breach of the separation fence between the Gaza Strip and Israel, as rockets were launched to provide cover for Hamas fighters using paragliders. Suicide drones also targeted Israeli army monitoring equipment and automatic machine gun towers. All of this, by the way, was trained out in the open. You know how surveilled Gaza is, right? The most surveilled place on earth. Israel is proud to have one of the largest surveillance systems, most sophisticated surveillance systems in the world. Gaza is the most surveilled place on earth. And all this training with paragliders, etc., all done out in the open. And some of these videos were posted on Instagram beforehand. The attack, which Hamas named Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, initially targeted a series of military bases, outposts, and Israeli soldiers stationed at the Eretz Beit Hanun crossing. However, it also struck Israeli kibbutzes, settler communities located around the Gaza area. Various other civilian sites were also attacked, most notably the Nova Music Festival, where hundreds were reportedly killed. According to the Israeli narrative, Hamas intentionally targeted the festival. But we know from Hamas statements and others that Hamas didn't even know the festival was going to be there because it was moved there 2 days beforehand. And many of those killed at the Nova Music Festival, if you read the eyewitness testimony, they said they were being shot at by IDF, by police. Many, if not most, of those killed at Nova Music Festival were killed by IDF, by Israel. However, as early as November, Israeli police reports concluded that Hamas had not initially planned to target the festival. Hamas fighters only became aware of the festival during the operation. According to a report published by Haaretz, police analysis found that most partygoers had fled the Nova Music Festival approximately a half an hour before any gunfire was heard. Additionally, the report indicated that an Israeli military helicopter had opened fire, resulting in the deaths of at least some festival participants. But I think it's a lot, and I think that's why they had to shred and bury all the cars. A United Nations human rights report released on June 12th confirmed the presence of at least 8 attack helicopters in various locations and noted that it was aware of reports suggesting these helicopters had been used to attack civilian vehicles at the festival site. And those vehicles were, say it with me, shredded and buried in undisclosed locations. An investigation published in January concluded that at least 70 vehicles were destroyed by Israeli tank, drone, or helicopter fire following orders from senior Israeli military command to prevent the capture of hostages at any cost, which is the now infamous Hannibal directive. We know the Hannibal directive was used. The Hannibal directive says, kill the hostages, kill the hostage takers, kill anyone who's around. That's what the IDF does. Several videos show Hamas fighters engaging in violent actions within civilian areas, including indiscriminate firing, killing non-combatants, and throwing grenades into shelters. So we shouldn't deny that those things went on. This evidence, and much of it is video evidence, the evidence highlights instances of violence, but it does not conclusively prove that these actions were part of a broader premeditated strategy. Furthermore, Hamas was not the only group involved in breaching the Gaza separation fence on October 7th. At least 5 different Palestinian groups reportedly followed suit, targeting Israeli military sites and settlements. It's estimated that over 4,000 people crossed the fence that day. While Hamas led the mission, it remains unclear how many Israeli deaths were caused by fighters from these other armed groups. It's important to note that the Hannibal directive was used. The results of an internal Israeli military investigation confirmed that the Hannibal directive had been triggered that day. So even the Israeli military has admitted it. Now let's get to some of the other stuff that we were told was true about October 7th. Israeli media government officials and their Western counterparts have repeatedly circulated several unverified claims about the events of October 7th. These included allegations such as the beheading of 40 babies, infants being hung on clotheslines, and pregnant woman whose baby was cut from her. Many of these stories were initially promoted by the Zaka Rescue Agency, which has faced its own controversies, including corruption allegations. He's going very easy on Zaka. I did a deeper dive on them a while back. They're a completely false rescue network. Basically, what they do is they go in, they claim they're doing it for religious reasons. They basically get rid of the bodies. They destroy all forensic evidence. In this case, they staged scenes to make it look like things had happened that didn't. Also, on top of that, they have exactly zero medic training. So they claim to be this medical training group, this first responder group. It's complete garbage. According to confirmed reports, 1 baby died on October 7th, and obviously that is tragic. That baby was killed by a bullet during crossfire. Other claims regarding babies have all been debunked. Literally, the UN and every other agency, including many in the Israeli government, have said the number of babies killed on October 7th is one baby. And another fetus died when the mother was caught in the fire, and she died, and the fetus was not able to be saved. So that's the entirety of babies and fetuses that were involved in this. And of course, those are tragic. But you know what? They are not these stories we were told. They are not the babies in the ovens. They're not the babies on the clothesline. None of that. It was all lies, and yet you continue. Joe Biden said he saw a video of it. Like, that's how insane these people are. There have also been allegations of a mass rape campaign. I've covered that extensively as well. And I'm going to start saying, I'm going to say R word for the rest of this because unfortunately YouTube suppresses videos where you say R word or things like that. So therefore, we're now in a position where we can't even talk about preventing R word. Honestly, YouTube, what they're doing is just gross. You can't talk about who the people were that were the ruling German government in World War II. You can't say that name out loud either on YouTube. The largest investigation into the Hamas allegations published by the New York Times became controversial when the family of the woman cited in the central case in the story, publicly refuted the claims. The family of the woman who died on October 7th, who was killed on October 7th, said she was not R-worded, and in fact, it's offensive to them that the New York Times is putting this out there. The article quickly became the subject of a scandal, further casting doubt on all validity. There is currently no forensic evidence, zero documented intent, 0 identified victims, 0 credible witnesses supporting these claims. And Bill Maher also, just like Joe Biden, claims there's video. No, there's not, because it didn't happen. And I know one of the responses by Israelis or Israel defenders is, well, there's no victims because they're all dead. Okay, well, if that were true, guess what? There would still be other forensic. There was video of a lot of what went on October 7th. There would be video. There would be other witnesses. There are so many levels of ways to figure this out that it simply didn't happen. It doesn't exist. There was a UN report also that went in, and here's the thing. They only spoke to Israeli officials. They did not have the ability to actually investigate. They basically had the ability to go in and just listen to what Israel told them. So they concluded that Israelis were subjected to various forms of conflict-related sexual violence, though the report stopped short of providing definitive conclusions. Instead, it stated that such incidents were possible. Notably, the report debunked 2 specific allegations as unfounded. They said there's conceivable sexual violence, but 0 evidence of anything concrete and 0 evidence of some sort of mass R-word plot. And again, Israel had the entire blueprint of what was going to go down on October 7th. And you know what wasn't in that blueprint? Our word. While it's difficult to determine how many were killed by Israeli forces versus Palestinian groups, the scale of destruction suggests Israel was responsible for a significant portion of the casualties. So this is a review of what went on October 7th, now that we have all of this evidence. And honestly, and you can check it out at Mint Press if you want to read every word of it, honestly, he goes easy. Like, he doesn't talk about the Nova Music Festival being moved there 2 days before. He doesn't talk about how even the New York Times has reported Israel had every detail of October 7th a year before. He doesn't talk about how Israel decided to stand down for many hours after it started happening. So, and I'm not saying those are failures. I'm saying he chose to do a very careful job of relaying what we now know about October 7th. And it is the opposite of what we were told for months. And many of us were, called whatever, cranks, conspiracy theorists, all these things for reporting this stuff. And it's all been proven true. Yeah, I stress this all the time, and I cannot stress it more. I am always right. Okay, can we not just understand? I'm always right. Maybe it was one time. There was like one time I got something wrong, but basically always right.